Hey guys, Teresa here. Welcome back to my channel, Lost My Thread. Today is going to be my video on the hashtag 20 sewing questions. I found out about this hashtag from watching a video from Erin of Erin Sews. I really love Erin's channel. I love her general attitude, her approach, her style. I would definitely recommend checking out her video following the same hashtag. I'll put a link down below. She actually found out from watching a video of Row Can Sews, but it was originally Annette from Sewing in Michigan who came up with this hashtag. I really enjoy this kind of hashtag on YouTube. I think it's fun to find other sewing vloggers that I was not familiar with, so thank you, Erin, for pointing those two out. But also, I really enjoy hearing lots of different sewists answering the same questions but having some pretty different answers, sometimes very strong answers. I am from Chicago, if you're not familiar with me. I live in London, England. I sew a lot of the time. I make sewing videos once a week. I've been on YouTube for 5 years now. I really enjoy it. I love the YouTube sewing community. I'm going to get right into the questions, trying to do more like a rapid fire thing, so I'm not going to think overly about my answers, but I think it's fun to just run through with whatever comes to mind. The first question is, how do you feel about using a new pattern? And I will say that I do probably do about 50-50, like old favorites versus new patterns, but I am frequently drawn to new patterns, as I'm sure most of us are, and especially if there's something that has unique design lines or it is designed in a way that I'm not really sure how I would hack that from a previous pattern. I also do appreciate that a lot of times the hard work is done for you. You don't have to actually sit and do all the pattern hacking yourself. So I probably do prefer new patterns a little bit to old favorites, but there's a lot to be said for having one that you know how to make. But yes, I'm making myself pick just one, and I prefer new patterns. Second question is, do you remake/mend? And yes, I absolutely do. I have lots of videos where I've shared lots of refashions that I've done, alterations that I've done to make things work if they're not working for me. Mending is definitely something, if I'm really enjoying a garment and I appreciate wearing the garment and there's something that needs repairing, I will absolutely repair that. But I will say those types of projects do tend to kind of stack up. I'm not the best at just working on things as they come up. I tend to get a whole load of refashions and mending jobs and things like that and just power through them at once. I feel like I can get into the right headspace to do it and get a lot more done that way, but I think we should all be ideally doing that as much as we can. Question number 3 is, do you make toiles or mock-ups? And I think it, like many people, probably depends on the project. If I'm making something that is new to me that has a fitted bodice, 9 times out of 10 I will make a toile or a mock-up. And I tend to do like full on with calico fabric, muslin fabric, just to know if the fit is right, because I frequently do need to make adjustments. Now there are certain pattern companies that I use frequently, and I usually have a pretty good idea if they're going to fit me out of the packet or if there are like standard alterations that I need to make. But if it is very fitted, I'm still usually going to go ahead and do that. I'm not somebody who makes like a wearable muslin, a wearable toile. To me, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because if I have fabric that I don't really care about, then I probably don't want it and I want to give it away at a fabric swap. And if it's fabric that I'm really excited about, then it's not really a wearable muslin anymore. So I will, like I said, usually if it's really very fitted, particularly a bodice and trousers as well, I will do a test fit. But outside of that, if it's quite loose fitted, if it's quite relaxed, I will just kind of wing it. So it depends, but I will say probably yes, based on like the overall concept. I think it's really important to make toiles and mock-ups to make sure that you're getting a good fit with the finished garment. You'll save yourself a lot of hassle in the end and come out with a garment hopefully that you really love the first time round. Question number 4 is, how do you feel about pre-washing fabric? Pre-washing fabric for me is a default. It is happening. None of the fabric goes into my fabric collection without being pre-washed. I will have things separate and stacked up. I might even put them in my laundry basket if I haven't had time to wash them first. And I will say I'm not somebody who goes and serges the edges first. I just throw it in the machine. It turns out how it turns out. I give it a full proper wash and dry, because that's how I might potentially even accidentally wash these things at some point. When I'm actually washing my maids, I do tend to just wash them and then hang them to dry. But the pre-wash, we need the full-on washer dryer to make sure that we're taking any of the shrink out. If there are fabrics that I know are particularly prone to shrinking, so I found like flannel, for example, cotton flannel, I will usually do a double wash these days because I've been caught out too many times with things being shrunk up after I'd pre-washed them. So pre-washing, definitely not a skip it for me, and anything that is in my fabric collection that's stacked up I know is washed and ready to use. Number 5 is, do you finish your seams and how? So I will say in the majority of cases, I use my serger, my overlocker. It will depend a little bit on the project. I sometimes use French seams. I rarely use like a faux flat felled seam, but I have been known to use that on occasion. Sometimes I might use bias bound seams depending on what I'm making, but serger is usually my go-to, and I would say that's probably what it is for the vast majority of my garments. Question number 6 is, what is your favorite sewing activity? And something that I really enjoy doing is gathering. I really love gathers. So I love gathers on a garment, looking at gathers. I think they're very pretty. I think they're very feminine. They're something that I really appreciate in a garment. But I actually enjoy the process of gathering. So doing the long lines of basting stitches, something I really like about it is it's a little bit of time away from the machine. As much as I like being on my sewing machine, I love just like sitting on my couch with maybe a cup of tea with my beautiful fabric draped over me as I'm slowly kind of gathering those pieces together and fitting them into wherever they need to go. I like being hands-on and tactile with the garment as I'm making it, so I get something a little bit extra about doing that stage. And then it's also so satisfying when you put it through the machine, you pull your basting stitches out, you have a good look, and you see all the beautiful gathers that you've created. It's very satisfying, and I really do enjoy the process. It's one of my favorites for sure. Number 7 is, what is your least favorite sewing activity? And I feel like it's one that's been on my list as my least favorite for as long as I've been sewing, and it is hemming. I feel like there's something about the stage when you get to the hemming, it's the end of your project and you're like, oh, this thing isn't even hemmed yet and now I have to hem it, but it feels like it should be done, which is silly because it's often the last stage of a process. I really do appreciate when you have a garment that has you hem it before you do the final steps of hemming it a bit earlier on in the process, but you need to know obviously the exact length that you want it to be, because usually you need to try the garment on before you do the hem because you might want to adjust it a little bit. But I don't love hemming, especially when you have like a curved hem and it doesn't really fold up very easily. Yes, you can use a hem facing, sometimes use a hem facing. There are all the tricks you can do with a little bit of the gathering stitch as well, but it's definitely, to me, it feels tedious and it feels like an extra hassle at the end of the project. For a period, I tried doing some hand sewing hems, and I do actually really like hand sewing a hem in a very similar way to gathering. I love that you can be away from the machine, have your nearly finished garment and sit and slowly work on that. It can be very satisfying, but I've had some problems with my hand and my wrist for the last, like, I don't know, coming up to 2 years now, and hand sewing is one of the worst things for me to do, particularly like long periods of hand sewing. So I've had to go back to hemming on the machine, and it is a hassle. Also getting a straight hem, because we have 3D bodies that poke out in different directions, so to be able to get something completely neat is really awkward. I did buy that little chalk puffer hemming machine thing, not a machine, a little device, and it's okay, but you have to be right close against it as you're going, and often you're rotating 360 and you can't really see what you're doing. I think I need to play with doing that with a mirror. Maybe I would have a more successful time. It does definitely improve it, but I often have to do a lot of pinning and checking and readjusting, and it just feels like a whole hassle. I don't love hemming. Number 8, stash fabric or new fabric. Now, of course, there is always the appeal of new fabric, and your stash fabric was once new fabric, so it's kind of a funny one to answer, but what I will say is I will always check what I have in my fabric collection, in my stash, before I look for something new. I'm somebody who will usually come up with an idea for a type of garment I want to make and then try and find the appropriate fabric for it. But I will say, quite often I don't have the fabric in my collection that I want for that, so I end up buying new. Part of that is because when I buy fabric, I pretty much always buy it with a project in mind. So even if I find a fabric and I think, oh my god, this is beautiful, I want to get it, I will think, okay, well, what am I going to make with this? Because I want to make sure that I'm buying the right amount of fabric. I'm not buying too much. I'm not buying, too little amounts. So I feel like in general, everything that's in my collection has a plan next to it, and it can be quite difficult to pivot and change plans when I'm like, no, but that fabric is going to be for my Cameron button-up or whatever it might be. And so I feel like I don't want to tuck into that for my other projects, but it is nice when you can use what you have in your stash. So that is my default. I think I'm always going to say that is my preference. And number 9, are pockets a must? And this is hard for me. I feel like if I were to see myself from 10, 20 years ago and hear my answer, I would be really annoyed with myself, but no, pockets are not a must. Pockets are a wonderful bonus on the other hand. I love a pocket. I love a good deep pocket. I like a pocket that is attached at the waistband, not flapping around. So I have a lot of pocket opinions. But there are garments where pockets just don't make sense, and I think that's okay. I will often add pockets onto things that don't have pockets. So I will say like the majority of my dresses, my skirts, my trousers, my shorts do have pockets. But there's times when they're just not needed or they're just not appropriate for the pattern. So I cannot say they're a must, but I love it when there is a good pocket for sure. Question number 10 is knits or wovens. I wear both. I sew with both. But I do definitely have a preference for wovens. Knit fabrics I feel like are just a little bit more fussy and a bit more unpredictable as far as getting your machine set up, avoiding wavy seams. Of course there are fussy and irritating woven fabrics, but I still feel like I would prefer a really slinky, slippery woven fabric to knits quite often of the time. And also just in the what I everyday wear, what I'm wearing, I really do generally reach for my wovens more than my knits. So I'm a woven girl, love my wovens. Number 11 is favorite fasteners or no fasteners. Now I do really like buttons. I enjoy putting buttons onto garments. Now this is similar to hems. I don't really know why it feels so different to me that I can sit on the couch when a garment is nearly finished and sew that button on as the finishing touch, and it feels really nice and very satisfying to be doing that as like the final thing. But it doesn't annoy me in the same way that putting hems onto garments is. So I don't really know. Who knows what that's about? But I do like also with buttons that you have more choice. Of course, whenever we're making a pattern, we make choices along the way. We can hack things if we want to, choose a different view if we want to. We're choosing the fabric. But I feel like being able to choose the button is just an extra way to make it a little bit more your own. And I like the variety of buttons that are out there. I think it's a fun extra detail to add an interesting or a unique button. Do love buttons, love button-ups. I think that's gotta be my favorite. Snaps are fine, zippers are fine, buttons are my favorite. Question number 12 is sewing for yourself or others. I do sew for others because I like giving people things that I've made. I like them knowing that I thought about them and I pick out fabric especially for them, patterns that I think they will really like. But I do find the process of sewing for others a lot more laborious than sewing for myself. And that's just because I'm way more of a perfectionist when I'm sewing for others. And I do feel like everything I'm doing, I'm questioning, I'm taking longer, I'm kind of overthinking things. When I sew for me, I can kind of just be free and easy and not think that much about it, get into the zone. So I do really love sewing for me in particular. Question 13 is YouTube or Instagram, which is a funny question to put on YouTube because you would think probably most of us like YouTube if we're here. I think I probably go to the two different platforms for different reasons. In general, if I were going to choose one social media platform to use, I would go with YouTube. I like YouTube. I feel like there's a different vibe. I feel like it's a bit less polished in a way. We're a little bit more just ourselves on YouTube, whereas Instagram, you know, you'll take 1,000 photos and pick the ones that are like the best ones or the best version that don't always show the full picture. And Instagram, I feel like, is also just a bit more blah because of being Meta owned, all the ads, all the things that I'm not actually subscribed to that are appearing in my feed. I generally don't love Instagram, and I've been going back and forth about quitting Instagram entirely for such a long time, but it's really good for sewing because you can use hashtag for sewing patterns. You can use hashtags even for specific fabrics. So when I'm making something and I want to see other people's versions, I'm often going to look on Instagram for that. So I can't take it away from Instagram, but I really don't love Instagram. I've actually been getting into another app recently called Threadloop, which I'm going to be talking about in my like sewing updates video a little bit more detail, but it's basically kind of like what I feel like Instagram used to be before it turned a bit more like trashy and more meta. And check it out if you're not familiar with it. People can share things that they're making. They can also share ideas for projects, different types of like lists of garments that fit into different categories. It's an interesting, fun, and growing community, so I'm definitely interested to see where that one goes because it's ad-free and it's very much sewing specific. But YouTube, I really do love it. I love the conversational nature. I feel like I get to know people. I have friends that I feel like I've made through YouTube, even if they don't know that we're friends, and even if I don't know that you're my friend. I appreciate you guys being out there and watching my videos. YouTube is my fave for sure. Question 14 is dresses or separates. Now this is missing out jumpsuits, which I do love, but I'm gonna take the question as it is. Dresses are separates, and I love a dress. I do make separates. I make a lot of separates, and frankly, I do wear a lot of separates, but there is nothing like the joy of sewing a dress, being able to put it on. You've got a whole complete finished outfit. You can do a little twirl around, feel really wonderful. I love dresses. I love sewing dresses. They're definitely my favorite thing to sew. So 100%, that one's easy. Number 15 is how do you get rid of or pass on me-mades? And this one is still a problem for me. I shared a video a while back about some me-mades that I was kind of finished with and knew that I wanted to pass on, and I haven't quite figured it out. I think I'm likely to sell them on Vinted because I know that Vinted now has a handmade section. And frankly, I don't really care about how much I'm getting for those things. I really just want them to be worn and to be loved, ideally. So I think I'm gonna do that with some of the ones that I've recently decided that I wanna pass on. I do have some that I've passed on to family and friends, but I don't have a lot of family and friends who are similar size or style to me, so that's not an easy default for me. So watch this space. I also love the idea of going to a me-made swap, but unfortunately there was one recently in London that I couldn't go to because of the day I was working. I would love that in theory. I like the idea of that, but if people don't take the thing that you've brought in, then you're having to take it home anyway. So yeah, probably gonna be Vinted, but for now I'm basically just like hoarding them, which is not ideal. And sometimes I will refashion as well. Question number 16 is quick sew or involved sew? And I don't really want to have too many it depends answers, but this is one where it really does depend. There's not like a one or the other. I make a fair amount of quick sews. I enjoy a quick sew if it's a pattern that I've made before, particularly if I need garments. It's quite good to be able to bash out quite a few really simple and quick sews all at once. But there is nothing for me as satisfying as doing a really involved sew. There are some things I've really taken time over. I really appreciate when there's like pre-prep to do and you're having to do a lot of pausing and pressing and top stitching. Those kinds of projects are kind of like the meaty, satisfying projects for me. They're often also projects where I'm going to be maybe having to think and concentrate a bit more, maybe learn some new techniques. And that is probably one of the things I get the most out of sewing, is constantly learning. And I really appreciate constantly learning and problem solving and making mistakes and then undoing them and redoing to feel like I'm really getting my head around the process. An involved sew is always going to be that little bit extra satisfying, but I'm always going to be making those quick sews as well because I need t-shirts in my wardrobe, so I'm just going to be bashing those out when I need them. But yeah, involved sews are that little bit extra for me. Question 17 is social or solitary? And I do the majority of my sewing by myself, as I think probably most people do. I like the idea of being more social with my sewing, which is why I'm on YouTube, which is why I'm on Instagram. I've been pushing myself to go to more social sewing events. I have a couple of sewing friends where we will periodically meet up, the three of us together, and do some sewing together, which is super fun. But the reality is I probably get more from those things of just being inspired by other people, seeing what other people are working on, talking through and like problem solving issues that we're having. Just being able to talk to people about sewing is really fun, and that's really what I enjoy about it. But I actually don't get a whole lot of sewing done in those situations. I will bring projects that are very simple rather than the complicated projects. And the time at home by myself in my sewing room really does feel like me time. And it feels really special that it's just me doing what I want to do. And I get more out of that, I think, in total. So I do really appreciate the, I don't want to say I enjoy the solitariness, but I enjoy the alone time of sewing by myself. Question number 18 is, do you have a dedicated sewing space? And I think the short answer has to be no. Now, obviously you can see behind me here, this is my little sewing wall, my sewing corner. I do have a machine set up, but there is a table that is folded down that I have to pull up to be able to sew at it. And this is a shared room. So this room is like my husband and I use for various creative activities. The opposite wall to my sewing space, there are a load of guitars, which he uses for his creative stuff and music making. We have our computer to the other side with big speakers that he uses for producing his music. So it is definitely a space that both of us use. And if he is doing music stuff, creative stuff, I will sometimes have to move my sewing things into the kitchen. If I do want to sew early in the morning because our bedroom shares a wall with this room, I will move things into the kitchen. So it's not like a space that I can use all the time, but it is a space where I can at least store things and I can have things set up so that it's easy to start sewing often when I have time to sew on a day off. But I certainly couldn't say it's a dedicated sewing space. Question 19 is labels or no? And this is one that I've recently been having a bit of a change of heart with. So I love the idea of sewing labels. I think they're very fun. I think they're very cute, but I've had some issues recently with sewing labels being really scratchy on the back of my neck, scratchy on the back of my trousers, which reminded me of all the ready-to-wear clothes where I used to regularly cut out my labels. I don't want to be putting things into my clothes that are going to be irritating, that are going to be uncomfortable. I'm making things exactly how I want them. But there are certain garments where it's very useful to have a label to show you particularly where the back of a garment is. So what I have been really getting into are my woven cotton labels. My favorite place to buy labels is a company called Intensely Distracted, which is based in the US, but they do ship overseas and they have really reasonable shipping fees. If you buy over so many, you can still get free shipping even internationally, and I'm really impressed always with the speed of the shipping as well. These are the softest, most comfortable, lovely labels. So generally the majority of them are just printed onto woven cotton. They do also have some that look more like traditional sewing labels, but something about the way they're produced, I think the person who makes them is very aware of wanting them to be comfortable. There's never any like rough edges, rough corners. They're always really nice and smooth. A lot of their sewing labels are quite like geeky inspired, so they're often themed to books, movies that are popular, often in like the kind of nerdy community. I like a lot of those things, but I probably don't really want them in my clothes. But I tend to go for the ones that are a little bit more generic. I just put in an order recently for an extra stock of theirs because I've decided I've had it with the scratchy labels and I'm actually going to be bringing those to a fabric swap soon, so hopefully somebody else can use them and love them. So in theory, I love a sewing label, but I think I'm just getting really fussy with my sewing labels. So the majority I'm not really interested in, but if they're just the way I like them, I think they're a really fun addition to a garment. And the final question, question number 20, is what percentage of your wardrobe is me-made versus ready-to-wear? And I think it depends a little bit what's included. If we are not including underwear, I am 100% me-made. I have like one band t-shirt that's still kicking around from the 90s, but apart from that, it is all stuff that I've made. In 2019, I started to make more and more of my clothes and decided that I wasn't going to buy any clothes apart from outerwear. In 2020, I decided, why am I not going to make my own outerwear? That's definitely going into the batch. And I decided that I was not going to buy any clothes. I was going to make everything, partly because I felt like what better way to push myself to learn new skills, to try different things, than to tell myself if I want that thing in my wardrobe, I need to learn how to make it. And I have not looked back. I absolutely love being able to wear all things that I made. It's definitely a default. It's a funny one to me when occasionally I will have somebody say to me, oh, did you make that dress? Oh, did you make that top? Did you make those trousers? And my answer often is like, yeah, of course, which is a ridiculous reply, but it's the truth. Like, I'm not wearing things that I didn't make because I have a lot of things that I've made, and I hate shopping. I've always hated clothes shopping. So to be able to make things and avoid clothes shopping and include my clothing budget in my fabric budget is a nice bonus. Underwear, I do generally have ready to wear. So that, if we're going to include it, it does probably change it a little bit to like, I don't know, 93% me made, because I have some underwear that I haven't made. I have made underwear, but I don't feel particularly desperate to have made all of that stuff. I don't mind buying that stuff ready to wear. It's not my favorite thing to sew, but it is really cool to be able to have all the things that I made in my wardrobe. It's great to have things that I chose the fabric, I worked on the fit to make it how I like it, and it generally does fit my body. And it's not something that I particularly brag about when people compliment things. I don't say thanks, I made it, unless they ask me where I got it. Then of course I'm going to tell them. But it is a great superpower. I feel like it's really nice to be able to wear all things that I made pretty much all the time. I would genuinely love it if you guys wanted to answer these questions down in the comments. I'll be putting them in the description box if you want to copy and paste. I think it's just so much fun to hear different opinions on the same topic, especially because we all love sewing. There's no right and wrong answers, and I probably would answer some of these questions differently on a different day. If you are a sewing vlogger, please make your own video answering these questions. It would be a ton of fun to watch a whole variety. If you do, use the hashtag 20sewingquestions. Thank you so much to Erin for drawing my attention to these 20 questions, and thank you so much to Annette for coming up with these questions. They were definitely fun ones to answer, and like I said, I'm curious to hear some of your answers down below. If you enjoyed the video, please do make sure you give me a like to help other people find it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see upcoming videos, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye!